Hi students, if you are one of those desperate students preparing for your test tomorrow, this last minute guide is the one for you. The topic is on compound and is simple interest. Right, let's start off by doing a basic questions. Let's look at the questions. So you have this person David and he borrowed 6,000 from a bank and the bank charged him an interest rate of 8% per annum. Right, so first thing to take note is the meaning of the word per annum. It means per year. So in other words, the bank actually charged David every year 8% interest on the amount of money he borrowed, right? Calculated using simple interest, right? So the questions will actually tell you whether you should be using the formula for compound interest or the formula for simple interest. Here the question says simple interest, so you should be using the formula to calculate simple interest. So you ask to find the interest charge and the amount to repay in 2 years, part A, and B in 8 months. All right, so let's do part A first. So let's write down the formula to calculate simple interest first. So the formula to calculate simple interest would be P. P stands for the principal sum, that is the original amount of money that David borrowed from the bank. R is the rate. Times is the period, is amount of it's how long this guy David borrowed from the bank, over 100. So this is a formula to calculate simple interest. Okay, so let's put in the details. So the value for principal will be 6,000. The rate is 8%, and they actually borrowed it for 2 years, over 100. So you can just use your calculator to work the value out. Alright, so the simple interest that David has to pay in 2 years, that's 960. But that is just the interest only. He also need to pay the amount of money he borrowed from the bank. Right, so therefore the total amount to repay in 2 years will be is actually 960 plus 6,000. And that gives you 6960. Alright, so now let's look at part B. Part B, we are still using the formula to calculate simple interest. But in this case now, the period is for 8 months. That means David actually borrowed this amount of money for 8 months, right? So let's go on to calculate the simple interest he has to pay in 8 months. So the principal sum is still $6,000. The rate is still 8%. However, okay, the value to substitute in for the time will be, you need to convert the months to year. Why do you need to convert the months to year? Because the interest rate is 8% per annum per 1 year. That means the bank actually charge you 1 year 8%. So if you're going to borrow for 8 months, then you pay at the prorated rate. So that would be 8/12. All right, you don't need to pay for the whole year, just pay for 8 months. So you convert the 8 months to year will be 8/12, then divide by 100. Right, so as usual, the total amount to repay in 8 months would be the principal sum, which is 6,000, plus the interest accumulated in 8 months. So the amount to be paid will be 6,320. Alright, so this is a basic questions on how we can actually apply simple interest formula to calculate simple interest. Alright, you may want to pause the video and try to do these questions on your own. Try it out first before you look at the solutions. So for this particular questions, we have this girl called May, and she borrowed 6,800 from a bank, and this bank charged an interest rate of 7% per annum. So the interest is calculated using simple interest, right? So therefore, you have to use a formula to calculate simple interest, and you ask to find the interest charged and the amount to repay in 9 months. So let's write down all the information that is needed. Right, so 6,800 is your principal sum. The rate is 7% per annum, means per 1 year. Right, and she actually borrowed it for 9 months. So the next thing is write down the formula to calculate simple interest, which is just PRT over 100, and let's substitute in the values for P, for R, for T over 100. Right, so take note that we have to convert this 9 months into year, so that will be 9 divided by 12. And using a calculator, the values will come out to be 357. But this is just the interest charged only. The total amount to repay will be 357 plus your principal sum, which is 6,800, and the total amount of money payable will be 7,157. Right, so I hope you've got the answer. Okay, so this is a slightly more difficult question than the first two we've done. In these questions here, we have another girl, and now this time the girl is Jane. So Jane actually put a sum of money in the bank. So it's no longer borrowing money from the bank. So now she is saving the money put in the bank. And the bank actually pays her an interest of 3% per annum, which is per year. So at the end of the 5 years, right, the bank actually gave her interest $360. So what is missing here is we need to calculate how much she put in the bank. That means we need to calculate the principal sum. All right, so the value for principal sum is unknown. All right, so the rate is 3% per 1 year. T is 5 years. Next thing, write down the formula. All right, so we're going to substitute the value for simple interest to be 360. And we're going to leave P because we don't know the values for P. It's an unknown value, so we're going to leave it as P. The rate is 3% for 5 years over 100. And this portion here, you can just use your calculator to work it out, and you will get 3 times 5 is 15. So 15p over 100. So 15 over 100, you can just again use your calculator to work it out. So 15 divided by 100, that will give you 0.15p. So actually initially you could have just used a calculator to work out this chunk of thing that I've circled in purple. That will give you 0.15p equals to 360. And then to find p, you just divide both sides by 0.15. And you will get 2,400 as the answer. All right. So in other words, Jane actually put 2,400 in the bank, and at the end of 5 years, she earned an interest of $360. Right. So if you have a little bit of time, but since you are so desperate and your test is tomorrow, I'm not too sure, but you should try. So pause the video for a while and try these questions on your own. So we have a person called Samuel, and Samuel put $5,000 in the bank, and the bank pays him interest 3.5% per year at the end of T years. Okay, now what happened is that previously the questions, the values that's unknown is the principal sum, but now the unknown is the periods. We don't know how long he actually put the money in the bank. At the end of T years, the bank actually paid him an interest of 700. So regardless of T unknown, P unknown, rate unknown, the way to do it is still the same. So what do you mean by the same? As in, like, you just write down all the information that's given to you. Here, 5,000 represent the principal sum. The rate is 3.5% per annum. T, it's the unknown value, so just let it be T. And then the next thing is write down the formula to calculate simple interest, which is just PRT over 100. Plug in 700 for your simple interest. Plug in your values, 5,000 for your P times 3.5 times T, which is unknown, over 100. Okay, and then basically you just use a calculator to work this value out. It comes out to be 175T equals to 700. To find the values of T, you just divide both sides by 175. Right, so this is how you do these questions. So supposing the questions is to find the unknown, the interest rate R is unknown, the way to do it is the same. So just submit the values for P, for T, and then just leave R as R. Over 100 equals to whatever interest is given to you, okay, and do it as the same method as what I've shown here, and you should be able to calculate the unknown, the value for the unknown. All right, so now let's proceed on to what happened if the interest rate is no longer simple. If the interest rate is a compound interest, then it's an entirely different story. So therefore, we need to know a new formula to calculate it. All right, so the formula is what I've shown on the screen. So let me write it bigger for you. Right, so the thing to take note is this value here, A, and represent the total amount. So the total amount means the principal sum plus the interest. So this is different from what we've done earlier. What we have done earlier are just simple calculations. The formula PRT over 100 is just used to calculate interest only. But here, if you're using compound interest, the formula AN actually represents the total amount, which is equal to your principal sum plus interest. So the values for P remains the same. That is the principal sum. That's the original amount of money you put in the bank or you borrow from the bank. R likewise represent the rate. Right. The only thing we have to take note of is N, that is the period. Okay, so this N, it can be compounded. You can actually borrow it for 1 year, 2 years, or for 3 months, or even for 1 month, the kind of thing. All right, so it's slightly harder in this case here if you are calculating interest earned, which is compounded. Right, but not to worry. Let's look at one example. Right, so now we understand what compound interest is all about. Let's do one example. So if supposing you have $8,400 with you and you want to invest this amount of money, and this company actually give you interest rate of 9% per annum, but you have to put it in that company for 6 years. Actually, if they pay you 9% per annum, I would advise you don't put it there. I think it's a scam because it's too good to believe. But this is just, a questions. We're just how do I put it? Just use it to solve the problem. Okay, so in real life, I think if a company or someone come to you and say, hey, you give me 8,400, I give you 9% per annum, I think it's a bit too a good deal to believe in. So anyway, the total interest accumulated, okay, will be different depend on how it's compounded. If it's compounded yearly, right, or compounded monthly or half yearly, the amount of interest you get at the end of it will be different. So let's see how different it is. So first thing first, let's write down the amount, the information is given. So your principal sum is 8,400. The rate is 9% per annum and is 6 years. All right, so let's write down the formula. So the formula, remember, this formula here, okay, is to calculate total amount, right? So I actually put down the formula that is used to calculate simple interest. Can you see it's different? Okay, the PRT over 100 is just to calculate interest only. But this formula here is to calculate total amount. So plugging the values for principal, which is 8,400, the rate is 9 over 100 to 6 years. And if you use a calculator to work it out, right, the total amount is 14,087.64. So that is total amount. So to find the interest, you need to minus away your principal sum. So your interest is $5,687.64. So can you see that it is actually much higher if the interest calculated is simple? Okay, so that's how you use a compound interest formula. Let's go on to part B and see what happened. Will the interest be even more than if it's compounded yearly? Okay, so we're going to do part B now. So if the interest is compounded monthly, what happened? I will have to do something to your 9% per annum. So your 9% is for 1 year. All right, so if it's going to be compounded monthly, then I have to change your 9% from 1 year to 1 month. So 1 year, there are 12 months there. So the interest rate for 1 month will be 9 over 12%. Kind of makes sense, right? It has to be less. Okay, and we need to calculate in 6 years, how many months would there be? So 1 year we have 12 months. So for 6 years we have 6 times 12, 72 months. So let's write down the formula. Total amount, that is the formula to calculate total amount, right? So one thing to take note is the rate. If your rate is calculated on the monthly, then the end will also be in terms of month. The rate have to be in terms of month. The end also must be in terms of month. Okay, it must, what is the word used? Synchronize. All right, then you use a calculator to work out the values. And the total amount comes up to be 14,385.44. So you need to minus away the principal sum to calculate the interest. And you see that this interest, this amount is actually higher than the earlier one when it's compounded yearly. Right, let's look at part C now. What happened if it's half yearly? So if it's half yearly, then I need to change your 9% per annum, that is 9% per year, to half year. So 1 year is 9%, so half yearly will just be 9 over 2%. And likewise, I also need to convert my 6 years to see how many half yearly they are. So in 1 year, there are 2 half yearly. So for 6 years, there will be 2 times 6 equals to 12 half yearly. So let's write down the formula to calculate the total amount, the compound interest formula, and then minus away the principal sum. Okay, so if you will see that if you compare the interest that you obtain for yearly, monthly, half yearly, you'll see that the interest that is the highest is the one that is compounded on a monthly basis.